I regret selling my Fujifilm cameras for this, and you might be surprised why. I bought this camera back in March from my trip to Hong Kong and Japan, and I actually sold my Fujifilm cameras, which at the time was the Fujifilm XM5, and I was actually pretty happy with this during the trip, but now I kinda regret it. In this video, I want to review this camera and my experience with it, not just reading off specs, and I've basically broken this up into 3 sections. I want to talk about why I like this camera, what are some things that are just different from Fujifilm cameras that you might like or dislike depending on your preference, and some things I actually don't like about the Ricoh GR4 and why I think I'm going to sell it for a Fujifilm camera again. Now a little bit of background info, I am a Sony shooter, that's my main camera system, but the Fujifilm cameras and now the Ricoh GR4 is more of an everyday camera for me, and I'm going to be comparing this to the Fujifilm system, but sometimes a little bit to the X100VI as well, because that's probably the closest Fujifilm camera as a direct equivalent to the GR4. So first, let's talk about what I really like about the GR4. And obviously, the first thing you'll notice is the size. I think the size is the best selling feature about the Ricoh GR4 because it's so small. This is the GR4 and this is my wallet. They're almost the same size, almost the same thickness. And that means that this camera is actually pocketable. And I know there are a lot of camera reviews out there that say there's a bunch of other cameras that are pocketable, but this is truly pocketable. You can easily fit this into pants, whether you're wearing like skinny jeans, all the way to like cargo pants, or you can easily fit this in a jacket pocket. Besides the fact that you can just pocket it, I actually really like using a small camera as an everyday camera because honestly the size, it actually makes me look a little bit less professional, and for an everyday camera, that's actually been really satisfying to use. So it's just very nice to be able to take this out. It's super small. I kind of just look like a tourist when I'm on a trip, or if I'm just out shooting in street photography or something. It just makes it seem like I don't really know what I'm doing, and honestly that makes people look at me a little bit less and makes it a little bit less intrusive. And if I want a big camera that will look professional, I have all my Sony cameras, but using a small everyday camera has been really nice. The build quality of this is decent. I would definitely say that Fujifilm is a step above the Ricoh GR4, but I wouldn't say the Ricoh GR4 is terrible. I have no worries about putting this in my pocket or just throwing in a bag, so that hasn't really been an issue with me. For the GR4, you do want to keep in mind that it is not weather sealed or dust resistant, so if you're someone who's always shooting in the rain or sand, stuff like that, then you're probably not going to want to pick up this camera because you're going to be a lot more limited to making sure that you're not shooting in wet or dirty environments. Now the image quality of this is great. This is a 28mm f2.8 and it's actually a really great lens. The photos that come out of this are really sharp. Honestly, for such a small camera, at first I was a little bit skeptical because this basically just looks like those Digicam cameras back in like the early 2000s. So I was a little bit skeptical about the image quality, but it's actually really good. And also the raw files are also really easy to edit in Lightroom, so I have no problems with the image quality at all. This is also a 26 megapixel camera, so it has more than enough resolution for most people. The colors of this camera look great, and you can actually customize film recipes in this. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but you can basically do what the Fujifilm cameras can do and set your own film recipes and just get a lot of really nice shots straight out of camera. Now that's for photos, but for video, the specs are definitely lacking. The highest quality that I can shoot is 1080p at 60 FPS, so if you're trying to use this as a video camera, definitely not for you. But for myself personally, I've only used an everyday camera for photos. I don't really shoot video if I'm just doing everyday stuff. So for me personally, that hasn't been an issue just because I don't even shoot video on this camera. So in terms of image quality, I would say that I'm really happy with this, and I wouldn't say that Fujifilm or Ricoh has one that stands above the other. Now the amount of customizability you can get with this camera is pretty good. So at the top you have 3 user settings, so U1, U2, U3, and then when you go in the camera, you can also save 3 different film simulations to each of those profiles. So that basically gives you a total of 9 different film simulations. Now I haven't used all 9, I basically just used the same 3 film simulations copied across all of the user presets, but for user 1, 2, and 3, I basically have it programmed so that user 1 gives me a minimum shutter speed of 1/250 seconds, and that's what I'm going to be using most of the time for like everyday shooting. User 2, I have it programmed so that the minimum shutter speed is 1/60 seconds. So this is usually when I'm in lower light, but I still want to be able to make sure that I have a decent, fast enough shutter speed to be able to photograph people without getting too much motion blur. And then for user 3, I have it set to a minimum of 1/15 seconds shutter speed. So this is when I'm in really low light situations and I don't really care about photographing people, or maybe I'm purposely trying to get some motion blur. That's what that user setting is for. Now the Ricoh GR4 comes in two variations, the GR4 and the GR4 HDF. And HDF stands for Highlight Diffusion Filter, which is what I have here. So by default, the Ricoh GR4 comes with an ND filter that you can turn on or off, but I opted for the HDF version instead, which is basically like a mist filter, and you can actually turn that on and off as well. The high diffusion filter in this is pretty good. I found that it blooms out the highlights, but doesn't really mess around too much with the shadows, so it doesn't really make your image washed out, which I actually like. I think if you're debating between the HDF version and just the normal ND filter version, I think it depends on your shooting style. If you're someone who always likes to put mist on their cameras like I am, then I would just opt for the HDF version. But if you're someone who doesn't really care too much about mist, then I would just go with the ND filter version. Now, what are some things that are just different about Fujifilm? Not necessarily a pro or a con, and it's just up to user preference. So first off is the focal length. So this is the Ricoh GR4, which is similar to the Ricoh GR3, and it's a 28mm f2.8 focal length in full frame equivalent. Now for the 3 series, you have the Ricoh GR3X, and presumably when it does come out, the Ricoh GR4X, that has a 40mm f2.8 lens on it. Now personally, I don't prefer a 28mm lens, and honestly, I think most people will prefer a little bit tighter. So if you're comparing it to the Fujifilm X100VI, that has a 35mm focal length, and that just is a little bit more usable for a lot of people in everyday situations. It's just a little bit tighter. You're obviously not going to get as wide, but it's a little bit of an easier focal length to use and to be able to get good images out of it. 28mm is just a little bit wider, and for some people, it might be a little bit too wide. Now, if I had the choice when it came out, I think I would get the Ricoh GR4X. Obviously, I can't because that's not a thing yet, but if I did have that choice, I think I would go with that. 40mm is a little bit more usable for me, for my shooting style, than 28mm, and I think I prefer that. However, there are some people who really like 28mm. It just gives you that wider field of view, and if you actually do know how to use 28mm properly, the wider field of view just makes it look a little bit more different, a little bit more unique because of a little bit more character and distortion, but for a lot of people, that's what they like. So like I mentioned, this is just a preference thing about if you prefer a 35mm focal length or a 28mm focal length, or eventually when it does come out, the Ricoh GR4X, which will be a 40mm equivalent. Now, even though this is 28mm, you do have crop modes available. So you can crop into 35mm and then 50mm on this camera. So you do have that option. Obviously, you will be losing a little bit of megapixels, but honestly, for me, I don't really care too much about megapixels. It's still going to have more than enough for what I need. So you do have those options as well. Now, the second thing that's a little bit different is film simulations. So obviously, because there are different systems, the way that Fujifilm and Ricoh do their film customizations is going to be a little bit different. Now, previously with the GR3, I would say that Fujifilm does have a step up versus the Ricoh system, and there's a lot more customizability. But with the GR4, they actually made a few little tweaks that makes it pretty comparable. So you can change things like your film simulation, your saturation, hue, you can change like the shadows, the contrast, stuff like that. Now, before with the GR3 series, you couldn't even change how much grain you wanted in the photos, but now with the GR4 you can do that, so I would say that it's pretty comparable to Fujifilm now. Now keep in mind, film recipes will never mimic real film, just because there are a lot of different things that are happening, and because you're not able to change like every single hue and do full customizability with the film simulations, it's never going to be truly the same. But for a lot of people, the straight out of camera footage from the Ricoh GR4 or the Fujifilm systems is going to be good enough for most people. But one thing to keep in mind is that because the Fujifilm does also have a bigger ecosystem of cameras, you have things like the X100VI, XE5, XM5, XT5, and even like their medium format cameras, there is a bigger community around Fujifilm cameras, which means that if you are someone who really likes to experiment with different film recipes and just finding different film presets to put onto your camera to try out, the community for Fujifilm is a lot bigger, and you're going to be able to find a lot more variety of film simulations compared to the Ricoh community. So again, if you are someone who really likes to experiment with different film simulations, you're going to have more choices of other people's presets for the Fujifilm system. Now with the smaller form factor, you also don't have a built-in flash. Now, not all Fujifilm cameras do have built-in flashes. The X100VI does, but things like the XM5 and the XE5, they don't have built-in flashes. And you can buy small flashes for this, similar to the Fujifilm system. But if you are looking for something that has a built-in flash, then obviously this is not going to be for you, while something like the X100VI does have a built-in flash. Now you also have a fixed focal length here, similar to the X100VI. And like I mentioned, this is 28mm, the X100VI is 35mm, but there are some people who are going to want interchangeable lenses, and you might be looking at the XM5 or XE5 or XT5 for that. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about interchangeable lenses because personally for me, I actually do like a fixed focal length for an everyday camera. And I think for you, you're either going to go one of two ways. When I say that this has a fixed focal length, you're either going to love it and this is going to be something that you'll consider, or you're immediately going to hate it and you're going to look at something like the XM5 or XE5, which can change lenses. Now I mentioned this has a high diffusion filter, and for filters, you can actually easily put on filters on a lot of the Fujifilm cameras. For the X100VI, you do need a small adapter. For most of the other Fujifilm cameras, you can basically just screw on a filter onto that lens. Now for the Ricoh GR4, you are going to need a decently big adapter to be able to put on a filter. And I think to me, that really takes away from the whole user experience, and honestly, the biggest selling point about the Ricoh GR4, like I mentioned, is the size. It's just going to make the camera a little bit bulkier, a little bit harder to pocket into smaller or thinner pants. So that kind of just depends on if you're willing to make that sacrifice for size to be able to put on a filter. Now, what are some things I don't like about the Ricoh GR4? I think that basically comes down to the user experience, and for me, that's broken up into three parts. So first is autofocus with this camera, and it's kind of abysmal. So Fujifilm's upgraded their autofocus a lot since I first used the cameras. I have a Fujifilm X100F, and compared to that, all of the modern cameras now from Fujifilm, the autofocus is way better. For the Ricoh GR4, if you're using autofocus single, which is just their standard autofocus, it's decent most of the time unless you're in really dark situations, but that does require you to be continuously focusing on a subject if they're moving and just kind of half pressing the shutter every single time. If you're trying to do autofocus continuous, which is continuously tracking a moving subject, I would say that's pretty unusable, at least in my experience with the GR4. I found that it doesn't really track, it doesn't really keep up that much, it's kind of hit or miss, and it's bad enough that for me, I would be using autofocus single, which is definitely not the autofocus mode that I prefer to be using. So Ricoh definitely falls short here. Next is the lack of viewfinder and the screen quality. So basically, this has no viewfinder, and that kind of makes sense because if you were to put a viewfinder here, it would make the camera a little bit bigger. However, this is a fixed screen, so you can't tilt it up or down, you can't flip it out to do any vlogging, it's literally just flat against the back and you can't move it out. Now I do wish that they had at least some sort of tilt up screen, even if it makes it a little bit thicker. I think that would help the shooting experience a lot more, especially because the screen brightness doesn't get that high. So if I'm shooting just at eye level, it's pretty decent, but if I'm trying to shoot any high or low shots, it feels bright enough I can maybe kind of just look at it at an angle and be able to still see what I'm shooting. But because it doesn't get that bright, it's kind of hard to see. And added with the fact that if I'm shooting high or low, I can't flip out the screen to get a better viewing angle at it. That kind of just brings down the whole user experience of shooting with this camera. All the Fujifilm cameras have some sort of tilt up screen or flip out vlog style screen, and that's a big upgrade in my opinion versus the Ricoh cameras, and there's even some like the X100VI or the XE5 that have viewfinders. Now these two things combined, the autofocus and the lack of viewfinder and pretty bad screen, it just adds on to the whole shooting experience. Now obviously I'm a little bit more spoiled because I have my Sony cameras, I've also been playing around with a ton of other cameras, but for me, cameras now are so good nowadays that it's not going to be about which gets the best image quality or which has like the sharpest lens or like the most bokeh. It's going to be a lot about the shooting experience for me. And it starts to get more into how I feel when I'm using the camera. If we're comparing it to something like the X100VI, that camera has more of like a retro vibe, it looks like a film camera, it looks really cool, and using that camera just makes me a lot more inspired to shoot. The Ricoh GR4 doesn't really inspire me to shoot that much. It is a lot more versatile because I can put it in my pocket, but then to me, it just kind of makes it like a phone camera that's just a little bit better. Like a phone, you can easily put in your pocket, you can bring it around with you everywhere. The image quality is going to be a little bit better than what you get out of a phone, but it doesn't make me really inspired to be like, I can't wait to take out this camera to take some photos. It just makes it a pocketable, high quality camera that's great for everyday use, and that makes it great for travel because I can just keep it in my pocket. But for more than just an everyday camera, something like the Fujifilm X100VI actually makes me inspired to shoot and actually makes me excited for it. Makes me feel like I can't wait to take this out for street photography or just go on a hike and be able to take some really nice photos with it. That's how it feels like when I use that camera, and I think that's why the X100VI is so popular with a lot of people. And honestly, that's the biggest reason why I regret getting this camera, because with so many other cameras around, I'm always going to lean to pick up something else instead of the GR4, and I'm only going to pick this up as more of a convenience factor for me. Now, if you don't get the Ricoh GR4, what are some other alternatives that you can consider? So obviously there's the one that I've been talking about the whole time, which is the Fujifilm X100VI. Now the X100VI has a 40 megapixel camera. Honestly, I'm not going to care too much about megapixels. 26 megapixels is more than enough for most people, so that's not going to be a deciding factor for me. It's weather and dust sealed. It has both an electronic and optical viewfinder. It has a built-in flash, an ND filter, and the shooting experience with it is just top notch for me. And like I mentioned, I'm pretty sure that's why everyone loves the X100VI. However, it definitely is bigger than the GR4, and maybe you might be looking at something that has an interchangeable lens as well. Now, if the X100VI is a little bit too big for you and you want to stay closer to the Ricoh GR4 size, I would recommend looking at the Fujifilm XM5. Now, it's not as small as the Ricoh GR4, but it is pretty small. I would say that it's not going to fit in like skinny jeans, but if you're wearing like some loose cargo pants or just baggy pants, or if you want to fit it in a jacket pocket, it would be pocketable in that situation. Obviously, XM5 does have interchangeable lenses, so it's going to depend on what lens you put on that camera to make it be closer to the size. Now, Fujifilm has their 23mm f2.8. That's actually the kit lens that comes with the Fujifilm XC5, and if you put that on the XM5, it's actually pretty compact. If you want to go super compact, you could pick up something like this. So this is the Viltrox 28mm f4.5. Now it's going to be a fixed 4.5, so you can't change the aperture at all. It's going to be 4.5 all the time. But you can see that the size of this is pretty much like the size of a lens cap. So it's going to be a really small pancake lens. And when you combine that with the XM5, you might actually be able to fit that camera into some jeans, or you can definitely fit it into like cargo pants or your jacket pocket. But then what are the next steps with my Ricoh GR4? I think I am going to sell this. I haven't decided on what I'm going to pick up yet after this, but I'll definitely be keeping you guys updated with a new video about what I replaced the GR4 with. And if any of you are looking for a low shutter count Ricoh GR4 that's never been used in rain, anything like that, I will be selling this, so if you are interested in it, definitely hit me up on Instagram. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. I would love to know if maybe the Ricoh GR4 is something that you've been considering, and maybe now after this video you might not consider it, or for you, maybe the Ricoh GR4 is the perfect camera, and I would love to know why. Let me know down in the comments below. As always, if you have any other questions, let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, remember to smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see photo, video, and tech content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.